So we could nerd out on that for a while, but I think you would exhaust my question. I don't even know what to ask, but it's fascinating. I'm really excited about the Renaissance. I've heard things like, I'd be curious how you've evaluated demand,
Mm.
because I mean, I've heard crazy things like the state of California, just just to electrify their transportation
Sweet.
fleet is going to require a 2x of energy output, right? So like, I'm assuming it's kind of odd when you did the research initially for INL, it was based on research needs for that facility, right? Um, what what work have you done around understanding the nuclear industry's, labor demand in general and the growth of the industry?
A lot. So that workforce projection work that I did for the laboratory was kind of a catapult, right? So then we were able to have these really robust discussions. We were starting to figure out where these major holes and gaps were, or starting to efficiently place resources, and all that's dandy specifically for the lab. But of course, INL is not the only industry player in Idaho or in the West in nuclear.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of partners, industry partners, whether they're deployment companies or suppliers or what have you, that are all also looking for the same workforce.
Yeah.
And so as that conversation started to elevate, we recognized that we don't have kind of an agency or an organization that is doing that work on behalf of the industry, right? We have it for the lab. Some of these companies can say, oh, I see these things coming down. I have this much on my books, so this is what I can assume, whatever. So we founded a 501(c)(6) called the Idaho Advanced Energy Consortium specifically to do that work. So on an annual basis now, we look at kind of the makeup of the deployment programs and projects that are specific to the state of Idaho. Ultimately, that'll grow past state borders for a lot of reasons, but we spend a lot of time with Idaho National Laboratory, with our two larger contractors, which is the Navy and the Idaho Environmental Coalition, which is the Idaho cleanup side of things. And then all of our deployment partners to really think about that landscape, 10, 15, 20 years out. What does that mean? Where are the deployment projects at? Are the reactors, anticipated to be commercially used? Are they test reactors? And what kind of workforce are you going to need to build every single one of those, regardless of their use?
Yeah.
How all that timeline shakes out. And then ultimately, what's the permanent workforce need to operate all those things, while also recognizing you have some reactors that are being powered down. You have certain types of power that we're potentially transitioning out of.
Yeah.
And so that organization was stood up specifically to kind of coalesce around these conversations and start to produce some of this data so we could really talk about it.
Yeah.
So we've done that twice now. We've just published our second annual report just in December, actually.
Nice.
But it's kind of the first foundational piece of data that exists for the Intermountain West as far as like a collective effort towards what are the impacts of the workforce, how many thousands of people are we talking about, et cetera.
Yeah. You said deployment partners are those education providers primarily? Deployment meaning like getting workforce ready?
Deployment meaning like reactor deployment.
Oh,
yeah.
Gotcha.
So
new reactors online, whatever.
Because ultimately they're going to be the ones that tell us,
Totally.
it's going to take me 360 people to operate my, 12 modular reactor.
Gotcha.
So
yeah,
we got to work with them to figure out what that is.
And is the scope of that currently, when you say Intermountain West, is that all the way to California?
When we say Intermountain West, we're talking typically Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, although keeps growing, right?
Yeah.
Montana wants in the game. We're doing some projects with Washington right now.
Yeah.
Colorado, just doing some work with Colorado. So that's kind of Northwest more than anything.
Yeah.
The policy side of things has been interesting in nuclear for a long time. I think energy policy in general. But as bipartisan as nuclear has become, we're starting to see some of these coalitions cross, typically not friendly state lines,
Sure.
Which is exciting. So I don't think that California is far off from that participation.
Yeah. Especially I get to work a lot in the skilled trades roles, right? So frontline maintenance folks, construction trades, et cetera. And especially when those trades are cross industry. It's like doing a shutdown at a plant and then going to do a build out of a new facility or whatever. Yeah, having first of all, sharing that intel would be very valuable, but it's also kind of a you just have this difference in the labor needs, right? It's full-time people versus surge staff. So does NEI or the Nuclear Energy Institute or American Nuclear Society, do they put out general data as well around plants under construction? What I like about the nuclear industry is it's like finite. There's a set number
you can capture it
reactors in the country and globally. EPRI also seems to do a lot of good data there, right? So like kind of how are you coalescing that with your research?
They do. All three of those organizations put out information. You know, they take it from a national approach, but ultimately the development and deployment is happening in a handful of areas of the country. So to your point, finite, it's controllable in some capacity. So we lean on that information. We reference it all the time. What I think has been the most impactful piece of work, quite frankly, to maybe unwind is the DOE liftoff reports that you heard mentioned this morning, where the DOE did a series of liftoff reports.
And I remember this now. A liftoff is what? A brand new build, right?
I'm
leading the witness.
I'm like a liftoff is lots of things.
Yes.
For them it was new nuclear developments. So new construction. Correct.
So liftoff is brand new. Greenfield, and a restart is brownfield, I guess.
Certainly.
Okay.
So for their report specifically, they were looking at new construction for new advanced reactors. And those numbers were excessively high, not in a way that they aren't accurate, just like it was stunning to the,
you think, or
no, not necessarily. Actually, it probably is relatively close, at least still at this point. But the reason it was stunning is because we hadn't done any national work, right? So even just taking the first attempt at it, and seeing those numbers at that scale was
so remind me. I was paying attention. I have no relative gauge here. So like, how many new builds were they talking about? 30?
It's been a couple of years since they published. 30 is probably close, but they were looking at about 350,000 jobs additional.
I remember that bar chart from the chief nuclear officer, right? And I'll hopefully throw it up on the screens. People can check it out, download it. But yeah, it's incredible. The number I recall was by 2035. I think it was there a shortage? That was the need. New need.
Yeah. So that doesn't even count, replacement at current fleets or replacements at the laboratories that do the same type of skilled work.
And do you recall the number at 2035? Was it like 300,000? Was it like 800,000?
I think it was like 120,000. Then we're inching our way up to 350.
Gotcha.
Who knows?
And so do you have any idea how many people the nuclear industry currently employs, just in plants, not supply chain?
I don't, which is tough because the way that the BLS describes that data is it's just like electrical generation and utilities. So being parsed out specifically to nuclear is not as clear.
I'm sure ANS has it.
I'm sure they do.
The labs are impressive how large they are.
Yes.
You said INL 6,000 people. I think I'd imagine San Diego, Los Alamos are similar. And,
yes.
How the heck are we going to? How are we going to find people to fill these jobs? Like, what are you encouraging? So it's first of all, it's hard enough to find PhDs. You're saying it for INL. I assume the bulk. Again, that bar chart was broken down into kind of like operations and maintenance folks, even construction. I think they had. At a operating plant, it's primarily operational
operations and maintenance.
So I mean, do you have a silver bullet?
No.
So
I'd be so much richer and I wouldn't be working.
Yeah.
The So you've got those layers, right? You have like the direct employment, like you were talking about, like the operations, the engineers that are currently working for those deployment companies that are trying to get these licenses through the NRC. And then, that fleet will grow as more companies populate. And then when you actually put it in the ground, right, you've got the spike of construction workforce. You also have the spike of supplier workforce.
Yeah.
You need the manufacturers, the fabricators, you name it. And they all have to come along with us so that the parts show up at the site at the right time, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And then you've got the permanent workforce, which will be operations, maintenance, primarily management, that kind of thing. And then there's the indirect workforce, right? So wherever you take a concentration of people and drop them, regardless of where that is, there's a indirect layer to that where you're talking about schools and hospitals and restaurants and all those kinds of things. So really, that's kind of where my role is centered on, is anytime there's an inkling or whisper of, oh, so-and-so company, we could potentially locate here. If that's within, what I would consider my region of service, it's our role to try to facilitate decision making that is as data driven as possible, recognizing what the labor market availability is, what the potential is to make sure that there's enough labor to get there, what the impacts are to those communities, and having all those conversations. That's why that network with the community colleges, the universities, and those community leaders is so important. Because anytime, a decision like that is made, it's a massive change. And if you don't have the infrastructure put in place ahead of time, the likelihood of that project sustaining to commercialization is lower. Because there's too many barriers.
And we seem to have delays in construction in nuclear, right? I mean,
yes.
So I know we haven't built many. We've had Vogel come online.
Vogel 3 and 4,
since 2020.
Yeah.
Is that it?
2021, 2020,
yeah. And then even the 15 years prior to that, we might have had one or two.
Yeah.
Right. So
and one of the biggest holdups in the Vogel build was simply trades workforce.
Yeah.
Cost escalation and timeline runoff was specific to labor force.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think your question was, what's the silver bullet? I don't think that there is one. This is a mix of like an occupational crowding issue, right? So how can we shake that up? And the more places the nuclear is located, the better chance that we have of that, right? You have more exposure, more access. People don't have to leave their homes necessarily if all the nuclear deployments are happening in one state. It will be more difficult than if you kind of spread that out.
Sure.
But ultimately we have a warm body issue. That's what I call it. Our replacement rates are low. Immigration policy plays a big role in how we can and can't fill jobs. And how we expose students to those opportunities, or quite frankly, even the workforce. There's a lot of people who just don't know what their opportunities are in nuclear. And being able to find a way to access those people, not necessarily to take them from other industries, but show them what their opportunities are.
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember going to school. I didn't know. You could have asked me 9 out of 10 occupations in high school as a senior. And I would not have been able to tell you like what they did. At all.
Certainly.
So I think we just finished a study that we haven't publicized it yet, but the working title is like the skilled workforce maturity model. So what are the stages that a person and an employer sort of go through, and simply put, it's recruiting, it's recruit, ramp, results, and retain. And then any organization can score as really poorly or really well, right? But that in the recruit phase, that just the talent awareness issue is one of the biggest issues.